All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, is here. And I got my good friend Jeff Hainsworth of Insight Software on the line as well. And we're going to talk about the great AI rewrite, preparing analytics specifically for the great AI rewrite. So, what are we talking about there? Basically, AI, and you're already starting to see this, is going to be used to rewrite most every application in the enterprise. I've already seen examples of AI ERP, which is stunning. I've seen examples, of course, of AI infused analytics, AI infused customer relationship management, AI infused basically everything. And there are categories, obviously, of AI. Everyone is talking about generative AI. That's got all the headlines these days. That's just one flavor. And there are flaws in generative AI. There are things to keep in mind. I've spent a lot of time playing around with these tools, so I know where some of the rough edges are. But what you have to remember is what they were designed to do. And basically, the Gen AI models were designed to predict the next letter, actually, the next token, which is kind of wild. And no matter how good they get, still, that's really what they're doing. The engine itself, that's what it's doing, is predicting the next token. So, what is a token? Well, you can't crunch letters and you can't crunch images, but you can crunch numbers. And that's why these models convert text into numeric values, vectors specifically, so a point and array basically for a certain distance. And then they match, they do the sort of similarity matching, if you will, amongst the vectors, the token arrays essentially. And then when it comes back to give you the answer, the result of your prompt, well, it converts those tokens back into words, and then you get this nice long prosaic answer to your question. Well, folks, I got to tell you, it is rewriting how people consume information, and there is a tremendous impact on publishing and on inbound marketing. Before the show, I was talking with Jeff about some of the discoveries that we've made, and I cannot impress upon marketers everywhere enough how big a deal this is because vast amounts of money have been spent over the past 20 years on what's called inbound marketing. That's where you buy advertising, most of it through Google, and you buy around certain keywords, and then there's a whole marketplace. It's basically DoubleClick. If you all remember, Google bought DoubleClick back in 2007, I think, and that's now Google Ad Manager. And my good friend Nikolai Menchikov of Mensch AI says that it's still DoubleClick. Like it's the same thing that it was 18 years ago. Like for all intents and purposes, they may have improved this or that, but it's pretty much the same thing. And he calls it the IKEA of ad networks, basically, because it's you don't really get the product, you get the pieces to build the product, just like you do with IKEA. Well, what's happening now? If you've used ChatGPT, you know what's happening. You ask it a question, and it thinks and thinks. It'll search the web first, and what it's trying to do is triangulate assertions. So based upon your prompt, it's going to tokenize the prompt and then go, okay, where have we seen these things before? Let's go find some sources to deliver our answer. And it's going and finding those sources. And then I'm pretty sure I haven't seen the actual production system, but I'm pretty sure I know what it's doing. It's scraping the content from the pages that look most relevant. And then it's using its summary tool to write a summary based upon that content, and it will cite sources. It'll show you, oh, I got this here, I got that there. There was a huge uproar when this first came out because they weren't doing that. And I'm like, oh, we got to get on that one. So they figured that out. Well, what does this mean? What it means is that traditional inbound marketing is gone. It's been pulverized, and companies need to figure out a way to solve for that problem. So this is something that we're very, very much focused on because no longer are people getting just a bunch of links and then clicking back to sites to find the information. The actual page is giving it to you. ChatGPT gives you the answer. Even Google, of course, came along, and after ChatGPT came out, they started rolling out their AI version when you go to Google. And what are they doing? They're cannibalizing their own revenue model. This is incredibly disruptive. And a lot of people think because everyone uses Google that it's just sort of a public service, but it's not a public service. It's a private company that is driven by profits and making money. And so that's, a lesson that I learned along the way is that, hey, man, you got to pay money into the Google system to show up in their ads and to show up in their searches and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, all of that is out the window because of this generative AI. But that's just one kind of AI. And natural language processing has been around for years. So that's not new either. But what is new is the tremendous amount of energy that is being focused on this space right now as we rewrite systems. So we need to rewrite the applications. We need to rewrite our workflows. We need to rewrite how we engage with these systems. There are some companies that are putting out mandates that you must use generative AI in some sense, and there are companies that say do not use it at all.
Touch it.
Right? And that's all. So with that long intro, I'll throw it over to Jeff Hainsworth of Inside Software. Crazy times we're in right now.
Oh
What's
man.
going on?
Yeah, maybe I'm getting old, but one of the things that I tend to notice a lot is, hey, haven't we seen this before? And to your point about Google, I never would have thought that Ask Jeeves was going to win the browser war, the browser war. Yeah,
That's
you know what
funny.
I'm talking about. But yeah, it's essentially that, right? It's just curate content rather than having me actually go and search it myself, which is really interesting. But
Right.
if we bring this back to the whole BI and AI and analytics, sorry, the haven't we seen this before story has certainly come up, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
past, I'm sure you've heard the term Excel hell. How many
Mm-hmm.
times did we throw that around in the last 20 years? Right? At least companies, everybody's struggling because I get a different answer than you get. And we wanted that whole one source of the truth, which BI was supposed to solve. And I would say
Right.
it did. Most companies have got over that hump at this point, right? That's
Right.
not it obviously it's still around, but it's not the most burning thing anymore. AI's kind of created that same problem. You can't have a dashboard or a report that's been just willy-nilly slapped together and is suddenly being used in boardrooms to make decisions. We came to that decision that that is a problem, right? I think we all
Right.
collectively have gone there. AI is kind of in the same point right now, especially with generative AI, right? You can't have generative AI if it doesn't know the answer. What is it going to give you? It makes something up, right? We
Right.
all had that laugh probably a couple of years ago when it told everyone to eat glass because it's part of a balanced diet. Can't have that happening in my boardroom.
No.
so so I think what's happening now with generative AI is it is doing the same thing that analytics and BI did. We need to get to that single source of the truth. And in order to do that, we need to give these systems access to essentially live and operational data, which
Mm-hmm.
comes at its own risks in a lot of cases. And
Right.
that's actually something that we've been looking at a lot at Inside Software. We have kind of realized that if you actually want to make this thing useful, it needs to be able to unaggregate. It needs to be able to query. It needs to be able to be that data engineer as an agent and really get in there and not just do the next step in the token, like you're saying, Aaron.
Mm-hmm. You're reminding me of the architecture, and a lot of the folks in our industry and in our audience are big into information architecture, and this is a rather disruptive force for understanding your ideal information architecture. So let's throw in another fun new acronym: MCP, Model
Mm-hmm.
Context Protocol. I've never seen something take off as fast as MCP. I mean, I think even the large language models took a little while, and then all of a sudden, everyone and their grandmother has an MCP server. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And it provides, like as the name suggests, it provides context for the model, and it allows also for a large language model to reach through the MCP into your information systems to grab context. And this is the key really for success, right? Is there's a guy I interviewed a couple years ago who talks about anchors of truth. And that's what your embeddings are. So when you take your data and you have your vector database, for example, and you get your embeddings, those are going to be the anchors of truth that try to guide. And this is a very significant transformation. So I've mentioned
Mm-hmm.
on a couple of shows before, but I'll say it again for context here. Think about the history, the whole arc of information management, of information systems. Well, the foundation has always been the database. And we've spent the last 50 years improving how fast the database runs, how much material it can absorb, how many concurrent users you can have, how many connectors you can have. There are all kinds of different things that we've optimized for the database, which is still largely the foundation of information systems. But there was one thing that was never in question, and that was accuracy, meaning you always got out of the database what you put into the database. It was a question of how fast, maybe you put it in wrong, maybe the wrong data got in there, maybe there was an ETL that broke or something. So it's not that it was perfect, but the point is like it was table stakes. Of course, you get out of it what you put into it. And now with these large language models, it's almost like you're throwing a noise filter on the end of that long process. So what's happened? All of a sudden, we're like in a rear guard mode, trying to find ways to sort of cage or shepherd what the large language model delivers in order to get the accuracy. Would you agree with that, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. And like in my introduction, when I gave you that little bit of a rundown for Logi Symphony, one of the things I didn't talk about is, of course, the AI, right? And obviously, I sort of left that on purpose because we're talking about that today. But how do I put this? There's a lot of risk when you actually want to hook up these systems to operational data to allow it to make real decisions, right? What happens if, and it was the same story with self service. What happens if you're hitting so many queries that you take down an operational database? That's a
Hmm.
problem, right? And you're going to have compliance saying, no,
Wow.
not going to do it. So what do? We service tidbits, right? We slap it into chat GPT, ask it for analysis, and you get what you get out of it. But the real way to solve this, and that's what we've been looking at, is we need to get our operational systems hooked in directly so that
Hmm.
AI actually has that full source of the truth that you were alluding to.
Hmm. And so the question becomes, how do you do that? One of the more interesting approaches I've seen uses a knowledge graph. So you'll have your enterprise data like your ERP, your CRM, the transactional systems that run your business, which you want to protect and remain deterministic. You don't want
Yeah.
to infuse AI to the point that it's turning those into probabilistic systems, because that would not be good at all. You want to deliver the products you're supposed to deliver. You really don't want any gray area in that space at all, but you want to surface that data. So Grab is an interesting way to do that. MCP also is a way to enable interaction between these things. And then what we talked about on our last webinar is also pretty important. The drivers themselves, ODBC and JDBC drivers, which are like these universal translators and save a ton of time and money and also save headaches, both for developers and for the users alike, right? So if you have the right stack, your guardrails begin at the driver level. You have guardrails in terms of policy that could be in your MCP, for example. MCP is a good place for guardrails, and you want as many of those as make sense to greatly optimize the value of the large language model, right, Jeff?
Yeah. What you're saying about MCP is really interesting, and we have definitely embraced that. So remember when I said earlier that I feel that embedded analytics and like the enterprise complex use cases have kind of converged. It's a similar thing, right? People don't want to go to an analytics tool to get answers. They
Hmm.
want to stay within where they're working. And if you're working in an LLM, I don't want to be, having a chat with, my data, I've maybe uploaded some docs, I'm getting some insights, and then I want to ask something about that operational data. I want to be able to use that analytics right in the system I'm using. So MCP is a way to do that. What we've actually done is we have an MCP integration with our AI system, and you can directly in Claude is where we're doing it right now. Continue your chat, add a quick project, and suddenly it has access in a governed way to that live real-time data where you can actually start servicing up where you were working, right? A real answer. So that
Hmm.
whole embedded idea is certainly coming back everywhere. It's not just about ISVs anymore. It's embedded in the tools you're working with right now. And not to say that ISVs don't care, that's a huge market. But yeah, it's for everybody where they need to be.
Well, you bring up a really excellent point. And, yes, embedded analytics have been around for a long time. I feel like it's more important now than ever because, to your point, when you have the analytics embedded in the system, you just see it surface as you're doing your day-to-day work. Let's say you're in customer service or even in engineering or whatever role you're playing. Having some analytical insights fed to you in that environment makes a lot of sense. I've even seen it embedded right into email as an interesting
Mhm.
place to go. Google has been doing a lot of that stuff with Gmail where it'll just automatically suggest, "Hey, do you want to follow up on this email?" And I'm like, "Huh, actually I do." That's
Yeah.
that's that's pretty good. And Google has come a long way. I mean, I remember we're first reading about how they were going to allow you to reference at Gmail in Gemini, and it would actually reach into your email, and which means they vectorized it for you, right? I mean, that means that on the back end, they've either vectorized it already or have set up a system to do that on demand, which would be pretty impressive. And I've found it works pretty well. You can inside of Gemini, you can say, "Hey, show me the top 10 prospects that could possibly do some work with us," and it will give you a list. It's like, "Oh, that's interesting." And so this is kind of how the AI is going to surface itself. It's in recommendations. It's ideally embedded, to your point, in the applications you're using, whether that's an ERP or a CRM or some kind of a Salesforce type application. Of course, Salesforce is putting a ton of effort behind their agent force. They even came up with a whole cool name for it
Yeah.
too, right? So wherever it is, that you're going to be in your environment ideally, and that's where these insights are going to come to you, right?
And it is all about agents now. You bring a really good point there. Like, again, one of the things we've looked at with our intelligence, I say looked at, we've implemented. We're basically there. We're betaing this right now. So maybe I should change my language a bit. But we point at a source database. That's not enough, right? If think of the dashboard and report building experience. You don't just take source data and suddenly get insights out of a dashboard. There's all that work. You got to eat your data vegetables, I think we talked about before,
Right.
right? What we're doing now is we've agentified it. So, because of our capabilities with Simba, we have access to all the data sources in the world. We understand governance rules, all those fun things. We can have agents scan through that data, make the joins, remove duplicate columns, actually infer relationships, cross database, and do
Mm,
all that work so that we can
wow.
start getting it ready to go for the AI system or even the dashboard, right? That's why it's kind of a better together story,
Hmm.
analytics and AI. There's such a convergence there, I think.
Well, that's an excellent point. Our first break is coming up here in just over a minute, but I will say I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It's not AI or BI. So just try not to think of it in terms of that. Think of it as AI enabling or adding additional context and capabilities to BI, because structured data is all about the transactions. And usually what it means is data in a relational database, in tables that are referenced by other tables, so you can quickly get access to transactional data about who bought what, when, where, all that kind of fun stuff. Whereas the context for all that is in the unstructured data. Now, we really didn't do a whole lot with unstructured data until these LLMs came along because it was just very unwieldy. I mean, you had enterprise search. I remember Google had this whole push on their enterprise search. And I actually talked with one of the engineers about a year and a half ago. I said, it never really took off. It never really seemed to work very well. And she laughed and she goes, yeah, you're right. We saw that ourselves. It's just difficult. It's difficult to and there's of course Elasticsearch. There are lots of other companies out there that are trying to do that. And it was always very difficult because of how unwieldy this stuff is, because you need a data dictionary, you need the semantic layer, you need a lot of layers in order to really get to the nut and understand what all that means. But folks, don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, having a lot of fun with Jeff Hainsworth of Insight Software. Yours truly, of course, Eric Kavanaugh here. And Jeff, I had this epiphany the other day thinking about all this agentic stuff. And from what I can tell, all bets are off. I think this frontier, whoever really nails agentic AI, and there are a couple aspects to that, of course, being able to build agents, deploy agents, monitor them. The monitoring is going to be the key part, and you're going to have all kind of log files. I did this, I did that. You got to be able to analyze that, understand that. Well, guess what? You can use Gen AI to analyze
You
and
can.
understand that stuff. So it's like we have this really wild situation now where agentic I would argue, kind of threatens the whole old fashioned way of doing business. Things like massive ETL scripts, moving massive amounts of data around and around. Well, if you really can get to just the data that you want, and you don't have to move all the data into some warehouse in order to analyze it, that's a pretty compelling storyline. Now, again, got to monitor them. There are companies talking about control towers. There's Google with its agent to agent protocol that's coming up with. So there's a tremendous amount of activity. I think we're still very much in the early phases, and I don't see a clear leader yet. But what do you think about that?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I have a clear leader either in mind, but what you're talking about agents makes a lot of sense to me. I think one of the biggest issues right now is that audit trails need to happen, right?
Right.
I get an answer from a generative AI system, and I think I really need the how did you come to this determination type of question. And I think that's one of the biggest things that agents really need to have. And that, we've actually, again, played with that quite a bit. In our Simba intelligence that goes with Logi Symphony, the agents will do all that data work that I was talking about, but also give you a full audit trail so that a
Hmm.
human can still go back and go, okay, it's great you did all this work. Let me just, trust but verify
Hmm.
is where I'd want to live on that.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and then it becomes a question of how do I analyze that in some holistic way, and it's a difficult thing to do. You think about IoT, for example. One of the real challenges of IoT is that you have so many objects, like IT asset management or something. It's hard to visualize that stuff in some meaningful way. There are some companies doing interesting work there, so it is, it's not a problem completely unsolved. But the point is, it's very unwieldy, and I think that's what's going to happen with these agents because it's like if they really can work so fast
Yeah.
and do little things. And then there's this big argument of, do you have focused agents or do you have super agents? And I've heard most people I talk to say you want your agent to be focused on a very specific thing, like anti money laundering, where they will go and they will actually trigger reports and pulling data to get the information ready for a person to make some decision. Well, in an old-fashioned world, you can automate some of that stuff, but a lot of times the automation is just it's too narrow or it's too thin. It only does one little piece of the puzzle. With these agents, you kind of have this multi-level automation where theoretically it's out there, it's kind of scanning its environment, because it has to have a runtime of some type. And it's scanning the environment and like, aha, it finds something, it says, okay, I'm going to go do this. And then you have sort of a second layer of automation. And that's fascinating, but it's complicated. And how do you unwind that? How do you know what it's
Yeah.
going to do? You kind of
It
have to
probably
play
has to
around.
mirror what we do often in the workplace, right? You do have this supervisor, manager, subordinate type of role. So you're going to have agents monitoring other agents in a lot of
Right.
cases, right?
Right. Well,
As I
I
said,
think
I'm so big on that audit trail idea. Is that if I'm, especially if I'm linking this back to, an agent's pulling data and I'm trying to get an answer that I'm going to serve up during my next quarterly business review, I want to be 100% sure where I got this is correct, right?
hmm
So even having the agent tell me the queries it used, I don't even need to like check every step in the work. Show me that the work happened and it wasn't just I just grabbed a number. Sorry, I didn't know, so I made it up. But
right.
just to have that trail.
Right.
Okay, I see you did 5 joins. I see you, did some aggregation there. It gives you a little bit more confidence
hmm
that what it actually gave you wasn't just a random answer.
Well, it's kind of like math class. If you go back to math class in high school or college, show your work, right? I want to see how you got this answer. I was always bad at that, by the way. I'd like just figure out some other way and get close, but I wouldn't get it quite
42.
right. That's right, exactly. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yeah, so audit trails are important, but what's interesting is that you're going to have these layers. Like I said, one of the challenges with these audit trails, you're going to have tremendous amounts of information. But that's what we have in observability anyway. And I think that kind of spun out of Kubernetes and the fact that now we have all these other problems to fry, to use a Seinfeld quote. But the fact is, you can use the AI at different layers of the workflow to get answers. But you do need that certification. You do need to have some quality assurance baked into the process that will, in many cases, be other agents. And you just have to kind of fine tune, right? The thing is, you're not going to nail it the first time. And even once you nail it, that's not going to last forever because so many things are changing. I think that's probably the biggest concern right now for CIOs and CTOs and even chief data officers is, gosh, things are changing so fast. How do we avoid making mistakes? How do we avoid kind of losing ourselves in the chaos?
Yeah. Chaos is right. I think the C levels are certainly pushing for this. Like, how many companies have? Well, you said it really well earlier. We're either all in on AI or don't touch it. Right?
Right.
I need to, in my job, use generative AI 5 times minimum a day, or don't touch it. Right? But
hmm
it's a lot of them driving it. But what's happening a lot of time is these projects are being stalled in sort of a POC phase. All right, we built an application. I think generative AI in analytics is a really good one that we can talk about. Like, we have a dashboard. That dashboard has 5 charts on it and a table. I want to ask it a question. What's happening is that generative AI has access to the data that's currently in that dashboard. It has the raw data, but it doesn't have the unaggregated information underneath it. It can't go digging back into that operational database to get more answers. It's really that surface level. So that's what you're going to get as a response. And I think that's part of the issue is these things need to be able to go a lot deeper. And again,
hmm
back to that whole agentified idea, allow it to go and do that extra digging. And I'd love to at some point talk a little bit about AI SQL generation if you're interested.
Yeah, let's
My
let's
hot
dive into
take
that. Go ahead.
is, should we be doing this?
Hmm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts though, Eric.
again, as a stochastic tool, and like this kind of, let's just get into these new applications too that are being designed for stochastic purposes. Yes, this is the lesson I've learned, and lots of people are telling me the same thing. Even using Claude for code generation, for example, or to generate your SQL, yes, use it to get the prototype and get 80% of the way there, but then use your human brain to go through the final 20% and make sure that it's correct. My
Audit.
brother-in-law, in fact, uses Claude to help him with SQL queries. Like, hey, there's a problem with this. Can you find the problem? It's good for troubleshooting. It's good for analyzing the query and telling you what's going on. Again, with the caveat that it's probably going to be 80, 85, 90% correct. That 10 to 15% could be a real problem. That's where the human in the loop still comes into play. And that's why we're not in trouble of losing our jobs anytime soon to
No.
AI. The key is to learn how to use it and to experiment with it, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I actually, on a personal front, I use something called Home Assistant a lot. It's home automation
Huh.
technology. It's a super open environment. I'm not here to plug them, but honestly, I should be. It's really awesome. I use the code generation there, but I'm a developer by trade. So I'll ask it what I want to do. I'll, narrate, here's, the ways I think you should logically handle this. Do the physical part of the writing the code because that
Mhm.
takes a lot of time and who wants to type anymore? Right? So it's really helpful there, but you still need that human to make sure, wait, I just wrote an automation that's going to water the lawn. Is this thing going to be running all night when I'm sleeping and my bill's going to
Right.
be $1,300 next month? Like you still do want that trust but verify type
Right.
of thing. But going back to SQL generation, I think it's very much the same problem. If I'm in an analytics tool and I am trying to do a little bit of data prep, and now I have AI that's going to attempt to write SQL for me, I think that's a little bit scary because we want to have these dashboards be trusted and certified. And if you have someone who
Mhm.
doesn't really understand the data, and yes, they got a query generated, how many times if you do a join incorrectly, you could blow up the results. But blow up, I mean actually magnify them, right? A 10 becomes an 1,000, that type of thing, because you've inadvertently brought back more data than you need, and then it's trying to aggregate it all up. So you got to be careful. And that is one that does sort of scare me. And I think there will be a bit of a rewrite there. That
Mm.
it's great to have the agents who have taken the time, they understand the rules, they know what you're trying to get, do that work in the back end. That's one thing. But having it simply generate a query for me and then I just use it in a tool, maybe it's me just being a little scared, but it does worry me a little bit that you're
Yeah,
gonna
well,
lose that. Yeah, sorry.
sure. And there's another side of the equation here, which is that there is now tremendous pressure to write these new apps, to build these new apps. And we
Okay.
have this incredibly powerful capability of things like Claude for writing code. One of my best friends in the business was one of the original team members on SQL Server. And he was telling me the other day, he's like, I'm looking at companies to invest in. And now enterprise software is not really all that interesting because no matter who you are, someone can spin up the code to do what you're doing faster and better in almost no time. And one of the most interesting assessments I've heard is that all of a sudden now the pressure is on the business to vet the apps and give requirements for the apps and test the apps. It's not so much on the coders anymore because they can code so much faster. So all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. It used to be that the business was like, all right, where, come on, you guys, would you get us something? And now it's like, okay, here's this, here's this, here's that, here's that. What do you want to? It's like, holy Christmas. The business side has to find a way to ramp up, and there are new roles of testing apps more
Mhm.
thoroughly, of having shorter sprint sessions, having more involvement. I mean, think about when we had the whole DevOps thing, which now is just taken for granted, but it wasn't always that way. DevOps happened when developers started working directly with operations people, hence the name DevOps. Now everything is ops, right? Marketing ops, sales ops, rev ops, like
RevOps, yeah.
it's everywhere, but it's the same concept that we're moving closer together. I think it kind of helps solve the IT business divide, but now it's like we have this whole different impedance mismatch where the developers can crank out stuff very, very quickly. It's onto the business to solve that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly the business does need to solve it because it's the mechanical part that AI really solves that I think is the biggest issue. All
Yeah,
right, let me ground myself. I know I'm a bit all over the place here right now.
that's
You're a
all right.
developer and you're
That's
writing
my
code.
fault.
Writing the code is not the hard part. It's understanding the logic, right? So
Right.
being that mastermind is the big difference, right? Think of writing, right? If I'm going to build a blog, one of the best ways I can use AI is I dictate it out myself. I write it the way I want. I don't just tell AI to write me a blog because what are you going to get out of that? Right?
Right.
Garbage in, garbage out. So it's empowering these people just to do so much more. If I don't have to physically write that code, I can say, here's the logic, here's how we're going to approach the problem. Second guess me, I want you to be my partner here. I want you to challenge me. Right? That's where we're going to see the acceleration, much more than
Yeah.
just give me an output because that part
That's
scares.
that's very interesting too. And I'm seeing a lot of content on LinkedIn talking about the importance of critical thinking and not just relying on ChatGPT and large language models. There is a temptation because they can do things so quickly, but they are good as a partner basically in your journey. So don't look at
Mm.
it as the answer to your point, because the hard thinking is what will get you to the right answers. And these chat GPT things, they can, again, they can help you, they can facilitate things, and as can all sorts of AI in the enterprise. And I think that's where a lot of the value will manifest, is in suggestions that are based upon your behavior in the past, what you've done, what you're typically trying to accomplish, and whatever you're prompting it, whatever you're
Speaking of
working
that,
on.
on the prompting, one thing I'd really recommend you try doing, Eric, is tell it your goal is to be my intellectual sparring partner. I
Hmm.
don't just want a response, or if I make a statement that you think is misguided, delusional, I want you to call me out. So the way I think of it is it's a tool sitting on your desktop that is just there to work with you. It's another coworker sitting on your lap kind of thing. Maybe not that close, but you get my point.
Well, I know people who have developed multiple GPTs. There's a guy for a company called Optima, very, very cool company. Lou Simon is his name. And this is over a year ago. He built out a finance GPT, a marketing GPT, a communications GPT, a vice president GPT, and he has them all like vet ideas against each other. I'm thinking that's pretty intense. I mean, you're going to get some pretty interesting answers if you engage with it in that sense. And then the other real good piece of advice is to be very specific, like you said, like be specific in telling it what you want it to do, right? Go ahead.
Exactly. And don't just accept me. If I make a statement, challenge, because that's where you're really going to get the value is this constant refinement,
Hmm.
right? Maybe you do get it to start with some kind of output, but if we can then go back segment by segment and like really dig in, are we targeting the right people with what we're saying? Is our message correct? Just keep working at it and just force AI to just keep refining that output. Is definitely a big difference you can get out of it. So just be a
Yeah,
partner. Don't be
that's
just a tool that gets me a quick answer.
right. And test and vet and push and prod and kind of see what comes out, because it will come up with things that you didn't think of. Like I've noticed this, if you ask it for a summary on a particular topic, anything that's been widely published about, it's going to do a very good job of giving you information. It's where you get those areas of sparseness, of data sparsity, for example, that it'll start hallucinating, it'll start generating things because it doesn't have something to base it on, and it's still not too good at knowing when it doesn't really know something. But folks, we're burning through the hour here on DM Radio. Don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Jeff Hainsworth today from Insight Software. And we're talking all about the great AI rewrite and the role that analytics will play. And I think this is a really good opportunity for organizations to get it right again. Because you think about, let's talk about data warehousing, analytics, business intelligence, then, of course, AI, that there's an evolution here, and old habits die hard. But there is an interesting heritage to Insight Software. And I mean, it goes all the way down to
Yeah.
the drivers. I knew about Simba because we would have a gentleman from Simba, George Chow, in fact, was his name. He used to always attend our webinars. And I learned about Simba, and I learned some very interesting things. Like we were doing a tech lab for Cloudera, and my good buddy, research scientist Dr. Jeffrey Malofsky, stood up a Hadoop cluster from the command line just to do it and just to kind of learn about it. And then we ran into some troubles. And you remember there was this whole story around commodity hardware, commodity hardware. Well, what we learned is, yeah, not so much. Like you want a nice honking machine. If you try to go down like, oh, crappy machines, it's not going to work so well. And the other thing we discovered, now this is 10 years ago, okay, this is quite a while ago, But we had all this kind of trouble, and I reached out to my friend George Chow at Simba at the time. I said, "Hey, we're having this trouble," and he goes, "Oh yeah, because Cloudera is still using the free version. They're not using like an updated driver." I'm like, "Well, how about that?" That's when I first understood how important these drivers are. And then inside software, you guys, of course, have Logi Analytics,
Mhm.
which had acquired Zoom data. We talked about data sharpening. That was from the Zoom data space. Logi Analytics was a leader in embedded software 20 odd years ago. I think it goes back that far.
We've got so much technology behind the scenes that I don't think people realize. I was actually on a call with an analyst the other day, and you know how they love to do these like magic quadrant style
Right.
reports.
Right.
One of his comments is, "You guys over the last like I don't know 5 6 years have been eliminating all the dots on my quadrant." Because inside software is, we've acquired that's data visualization. That's where I originally came from.
Right.
Zoom data, which was LogiX, who had the Logi XML, who had JReport, Zenda, Exago, all those kind of got merged into Insight software.
Mm-hmm.
So we've built sort of a data platform now. Simba is another piece of that as well. So when I say AI is causing a rewrite, well, we have to do a rewrite because we've got all this great technology, all these great people that have come in with these acquisitions over the years. Logi Symphony is kind of the culmination of all this put together. So
Mm-hmm.
when I mention these patents that we've got that we're bringing in and everything, and again, AI changes the equation completely again. It's pretty cool, and it's an exciting time. But it's one of those things where you hear the word Logi Symphony, and most people probably don't know what it is because
Mm.
it's a pretty new name. But a lot of these more heritage products that kind of ramped into it, and those aren't going anywhere, by the way. We have a lot of customers still on those projects. We still support them, but we're still taking the ideas from the best. And you've got to have a flagship, and that's where a lot of
You
development's
know,
going.
you made a really really good point there, and you take the best. And I
Uh,
think that this is the takeaway from this event that I'll throw out there for the audience, which is this is a huge opportunity now to rewrite your technology stack that you use for your business, and you can pick and choose which parts that you put together to develop a new solution. But you think about, as a general rule, machines tend to optimize the productivity of humans. And this goes all the way back to tractors and to manufacturing and all sorts of different industries. And now we're seeing it in this enterprise software industry where, again, legacy, a lot of times it doesn't go away. So what do? You're gonna layer on top of that and use what you want. This is where agentic AI could be incredibly powerful because, again, instead of the old-fashioned way of all this ETL, like massive amounts of data to feed your data warehouse, to be able to do a data product, to understand what's happening, you don't have to do all that heavy lifting anymore. And you're starting to hear about this. I mean, we've heard about it years ago, data gravity. Data has gravity. Well, what does that mean? It means it's
yeah.
hard to lift and move. That's what it means. So if you can just go in and access what you want, now then the whole new set of problems becomes, like we've said, orchestration and understanding. All right, where do we go? But I think that one of the main comments or assertions I would make is that BI is not going to go away, or analytics, let's call it. It's still going to be incredibly important. And like Sammy Akpai said, even more important because you need that grounding. It's easy to get lost in, the data candy, let's say, or it's easy to get lost in playing around with the large language models. But that grounding is going to be coming through deterministic systems with deterministic algorithms, and that's analytics, that's BI, right, Jeff?
Yeah, exactly what we talked about, right? We need to make sure that we still have that single source of the truth that we all worked so hard in this industry to make sure we're all doing. Let's let AI give that single source of the truth. And that's why that rewrite is so important to us. We may not be using the dashboard every day like we used to,
Right.
right? Mobile apps is actually something that I find really interesting. Again, maybe a hot personal take here, but I don't think mobile apps are all that useful in this space anymore. All right,
I hate mobile
typically, what do you
apps.
do with it, right? I'm going to go into a meeting, pick up my phone, I'm going to check the status of a couple of numbers. I am not doing deep analysis on here. I may, I definitely want Claude to be able to go and actually start serving up insights. I might have to ask something, right? But I'm not interacting with it in that way, that people typically describe as your dashboard on your phone. I need a
Right.
number. I could have served that number up with an email, right? This meeting could have been an email type of thing. Right, so that's
So
why MCP and this whole rewrite of AI becoming kind of the output from these reports and dashboards. It's
mm,
so important,
yeah.
right? The LLM is going to be the new interface. And I don't know if you've used any of these AI widgets on your phone, but I think that's the new interface too. I've got a chat GPT and a Claude button on my phone I can push and just ask a quick question using voice. I don't even type. But you
Hmm.
start using MCP, you have tooling into there so that it knows your enterprise data. It's got access to that real time. And I mean, federated too. We're not moving things around, right? I can go right at the source. It's doing joins in real time. It's able to answer questions that we want rather than just trying to serve up this kind of silly mobile dashboard that we all envisioned at one point.
Right. Well, what an excellent point as well. And I want to make sure we cover the things we said we'd cover. And, one size does not fit all. Personalization. I
Mhm.
was joking with our buddy Mark Madsen the other day. He was saying, oh, yeah, personalization is always the first use case that they talk about with some new wave of technology. But now we really are getting there. And we really are able, again, with the right information architecture, to be able to deliver personalized results. And you do have to watch out, though. I'll say with ChatGPT, here's a little tip that I've learned just by paying attention. It caters to your ego. You have to be careful which questions you ask, because if I ask it, oh, what is the best analyst firm out there for data, it'll say the Bloor Group. I'm like, okay, that's because I'm from the Bloor Group, and you're saying that. If someone else asks, it won't say the Bloor Group; it'll say them. So there's bias built into these systems. So you have to be careful of that. And no, and that's why you want to be able to vet things and have these sort of multi-layered approaches to finding information out. But, again, the key is your enterprise data. Make sure that you're doing, and you can use AI to improve data quality too. That's another interesting thing. We'll see this agentic stuff, and again, it's early days. But think about it. You could write an agent that goes and looks for missing fields in your database and finds information from somewhere else, and just set that sucker to work overnight. I have
Right.
heard that
But
they've
you can feed them too. And I think that's the biggest thing. You've got to feed these agents information because letting them just go ham, sure, you can let them go and do their own work. But what if I were to give it some documentation? Here's how we structure everything. Here's how our business works.
right,
Here is the type of questions our clients ask. You can start grounding that system so that it's very much like a pre prompt. Like I was saying, I want you to challenge every statement I say because I don't want you to stroke my ego. I want you to be that thing that's going to help me make
wow,
better output, right? And it's
wow,
exactly the same thing in an embedded scenario. If we're embedding AI capabilities and BI capabilities for pick an industry, healthcare, I can pre-train it to start understanding what a healthcare client would want to see, what type of outputs, what would it not want to see, right? How many
right,
acronyms overlap, right? Make sure it understands exactly what I'm asking when I'm asking. So just that setup
right.
and pre-training is so important.
Right. Well, and that gets us to small language models too. We hear
Mhm.
a lot about that. I know there's a lot of activity out there. Are you seeing clients that have a small language model that is on site, that
Definitely.
is theirs, that they manage and they run?
Yeah, because it's a cost risk thing too. Right? People are definitely afraid of the bring your own API key mentality
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because they don't know what it's going to be. You put that out in the wild or you bake this into your customer facing apps. What if the usage is so high the bills just run out of control? Right? So
Right.
small language models, internal, is definitely going to be used for those more risk adverse type people who don't want their data be trained on by a third party
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we definitely see it, and it sort of matches what I was saying about we don't try to be a vendor that's going to lock you in to a specific technology. You
Right.
can bring whatever makes sense to you. I don't know if you recall, but when we talked a couple months ago now, I mentioned that we try to be Switzerland,
Yes.
right? We sit in the
And that
middle. We will go where you need to be because we want to deliver the best answer possible rather than it's like, here's the tools you've got to use. Let's make it work. It's like, nah,
yeah. Well,
we'll
that
bring the best thing to bear.
that makes a lot of sense because you want to be able to leverage what comes down the pike. Well, folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Jeff Hainsworth about the great AI rewrite. And you want to use analytics to do that. You want to use AI to help you rewrite, but you want your data to be the cornerstone of whatever it is that you do. And I think that's the key, Jeff, is like understand where you're going to insert the power of these large language models or other AI models. To our point a minute ago, small language models, for example, you want to have a workflow where it comes into a certain point, is vetted, for example, and then goes on to the next phase. Do not let an AI model run your whole business. Like don't do that. We're a
People
long,
will
long
try,
way.
I'm sure.
There was a story and it just crashed and burned like
Yeah.
almost no time. It's like, all right, again, like self-driving cars, they are pretty good, but they still do have accidents. I don't trust self-driving cars. I don't want a
Yeah.
self-driving car. I don't
You
think it's that
remember, it's
useful.
been a while, probably like probably going back like 20 years, but when Photoshop first started in the mix, I remember a lot of designers saying this is cheating, like this isn't how we should, now everybody's embraced it.
Hmm.
Right? It's going to be one of those things where you throw technology in, everything shakes up for a bit, everyone's got a vision. We will have an answer at the end of the day, right? It's
Wow.
maybe a bit of a bigger shakeup than usual,
Right.
but yeah,
You bring up
still
an excellent
technology.
point. Like I noticed, I was at a conference a couple years ago, and just playing around with my new Samsung phone. I didn't mean to do this, but just touching the screen, all of a sudden, it like lit up, and it was a clipping path. And for those who don't know Photoshop, a clipping path is where you clip all around like a person's body, for example, so you can move them to a different background. There's a clipping path around me now for this virtual background that's just dynamically generated. Well, let me tell you, 20 years ago, doing a clipping path around a person would take a really good Photoshop engineer like an hour to 2 hours to 3 hours because you're just going click, 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 just like going all around this thing to do the path. Now it's just consumer technology and it's on my phone. I get it automatically. I just hold down and boom, that's a clipping path. That's that's what AI is going to be like in the fairly near future. And there's some really cool things that can happen. You think about the basic AI functionalities. Classification is one, optimizing an answer, optimizing for certain dynamics like, oh, I want to get the most energy efficient use out of this today, or I want to get the fastest queries back. You've got these dials now that you can use. That's fascinating. And it really, there's this long tail. We talked about this at the top of the hour, this long tail of legacy software that's out there. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of that stuff to rip and replace. So what do you want? You want like a marshaling area to kind of sit on top of that and reach in. And how are you going to do that? Agentic AI. But to your point, Jeff, you have to feed it the right information. And so that's going to be crucial. What is the mechanism you use to get these agents the data and the context they need in the moment they make a decision? To me, that's the big challenge. What do you think?
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's all about data access. And it comes back to what we were talking about before about drivers. Am I going to do all that ETL work up front? Should data live federated, live where it is, and let me query it and bring it together after the fact?
Right,
Definitely seems like the market's going that way. Right?
right,
We don't want to have to do so much data movement. Right? One of the internal theses that we have at Insight Software and data analytics is we want to bring the analytics to your data, not the other way around.
right,
That's kind of old thinking at this point, that we have to go and spend months doing ETL work, driving everything together, clean up, right? We can let the agents do that sort of work on the fly now, which is really
right,
cool. And then simply serve it up, let it work with your reports and dashboards and is one coherent system and use it
right.
anywhere.
Right. Well, and there are going to be some new roles too, it seems to me. I mean, I've said for years that there should be an information strategy group in every decent sized company, people who just research for new tools, new capabilities, new ways of doing things. I mean, that's a full-time job these days, just understanding the different models, what they do. I was talking yesterday about ChatGPT and its ability to do graphics like a PDF. They'll say, oh, you want me to do a PDF for you? And like, oh, sure, let's see what that looks like. Not good. It doesn't
No,
look very good at all.
try
It's
that.
not it's like it's that all things to all people paradigm that I think is going to hamper these things. I mean, you've seen some of the results where it gets worse over time at certain issues. It doesn't understand entropy, for example. It has short-term memory problems, long-term memory problems. You got context windows, all this stuff. But gosh, there's so much energy being thrown into it. You remember Sam Altman said like a year and a half ago now, oh, the era of large language models is over. And we're all like, what did he say?
Aren't you yeah,
Aren't you the what?
yeah.
Now, maybe that was PR. I don't know. It's hard to say, but it is closed AI, right? It's not open anymore. When it was originally put forth, it was supposed to be open, and now it's very closed. So we'll see. But I think the key for organizations trying to leverage this information is number one, experiment. Number two, be careful. Number three, get your data house in order. And you can even use AI to do that. But what do you think, Jeff? Closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, right? We really want to make sure that we are helping you make your applications the smartest person in the room.
Hmm.
Every tool is going to require some kind of rewrite because of AI. AI is going to help us do it faster. It's going to help us do it, even communicate better between users, right? AI is so good at delivering proof of concepts. So if I
Mm.
want to get an idea across to you, Eric, I'll probably ask AI to generate an image, create a PowerPoint, help me tell that story, right? So it's just going to help us get there much quicker.
Yeah,
But
I
and
think
we
so
are.
too. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go
I was
ahead.
going to say we're sort of the poster boy of we have to rewrite our application because we have this great history and we have all this awesome technology. We're in that rewrite phase too, and there's some definitely exciting things coming down the pipe with
Right,
Logi Symphony
right.
because of the rewrite.
I love it, folks. The great AI rewrite, it is upon us. It's happening already. It's very exciting stuff. I'll close with a fascinating quote that I got from someone the other day on the topic of AI ERP. And I'll just get your comments on this because it was one of those quotes where I was like, wow, hold on, I got to think about that. Like, that's wild. He's talking about how with AI as an enabler, you can now build all sorts of functionality, the kind of apps that we're talking about. Again, if you have the foundation, the moorings, if you will, of your data, your deterministic systems, don't want to mess with those, but you want to be able to ramp up new functionality. And typically in ERP, like that was a no-no. Like even if you look at going from what was it, the old sort of on-prem version to S/4HANA, which is what SAP is trying to push everyone to do, like you had to dumb it down because the cloud version only had so many dimensions, basically, only so many fields. And guess what? When you do ERP, you always customize stuff. But he made this really interesting point. This guy I was talking to about AR ERP, he said, look, why did we go with agile development in the first place? He said the reason is because you don't know what the customer wants. So you
Yeah.
don't want to do all this work and then find out you were wrong. So you would do just enough to get an MVP and then get your feedback from the client. And I was like, wow. I mean,
And
that's
AI kills that use case. It's so good with
right.
quick prototyping.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, that's so again, the mindset shift I think is going to be the most important thing going forward is to people to realize, hey, you really can move much faster these days. It's up to the business to do so responsibly and in a governed fashion, right, Jeff?
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about these days is helping you do that in a governed fashion. Provide as much tooling as possible, give you as much power as possible, and yeah, let you make those decisions without all that risk that we talked about.
Right. You mitigate the risk and expedite the value. That's what we're talking about. Well, folks, look this gentleman up online, Jeff Hainsworth, Hainsworth of Insight Software. We'll talk to you next time, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.
Thank you, Eric.